multi-step equations, and we're going to do a quick review of what we already know how to do, which is just a basic two-step equation. So in a basic two-step equation, we always change subtraction to addition, and division to multiplication is our first step. Then, if we need to simplify the sides, we do by adding like terms. In this example, there are no like terms to add together, so it's already simplified. Then we start working with our opposite property. We add the opposite to both sides, and our last step is always multiplying by the reciprocal, and then we get our final answer. So we always change subtraction to addition and division to multiplication. Simplify both sides by adding like terms. Add the opposite of whatever is being added to the variable to both sides. That's our third step. And our fourth step is multiply the reciprocal of whatever is being multiplied by the variable to both sides. And this is how we solve any equation. So today we're going to learn how to solve equations that have variables on both sides. So let's look at our first example here. Negative 2m minus 5 equals negative m plus 6. All right, so the first thing we're going to do here, change subtraction to addition. So I'm going to change this minus 5 to plus a negative 5. I don't have any division, so I don't have to worry about changing division to multiplication. Since there are no like terms on either side, we're ready to start working on this equation, solving this equation. Now normally what we do is we would add that 5, we would add the opposite of negative 5 to both sides. So let's go ahead and start there. We're going to add the opposite of negative 5 to both sides, just like we always would. But now remember, we want to add it to the like term on the other side. So I'm going to line it up underneath the 6. It's not going to be added to the negative 5 because you can't add a negative 5 or a negative m, because you can't add a 5 and a negative m together. They're not like terms. Therefore, I'm just going to line it up with the 6 since those are both constants. So now I'm going to simplify on both sides. So when we simplify, we're going to add straight down. Negative 2m, and then negative 5 plus 5 is 0. So that's negative 2m plus 0. Bring your equals straight down. Negative m plus 6 plus 5 is 11. Now I'm going to add negative 2m plus 0 to get negative 2m equals negative m plus 11. And you don't have to show the plus 0 step. We could go straight into this step, but for this one I'm going to show you the plus 0 step, and then I'll start dropping that later. So since negative m and 11 are being added together, we're going to work with our opposite property once again, and we're going to add a positive m to get rid of that negative m, because we don't want to have any variables on the right-hand side. And if we do it to the right-hand side, we also have to do the same thing, adding m to the left-hand side. When you have a variable on both sides of the equation, you'll end up performing the opposite property twice instead of just once. You'll perform it once to get rid of your constant on your left-hand side and move it over to the right-hand side like we did with the plus 5. And then you'll perform it again by adding your variable, the opposite of your variable, to the right-hand side, which brings it over to the left-hand side. So now we're going to simplify by adding straight down. Negative 2m plus m is negative 1m, or you could just write negative m. Negative m plus m is 0. And then we have our 11 to bring straight down. So we end up with negative m equals 11. Okay, so since our coefficient to m is negative 1, we're going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal of negative 1, which is negative 1. So we have to multiply both sides by negative 1 to make m positive, and so m equals negative 11. So when we do a check step for this problem, we're going to take the answer, negative 11, and put it in the place of m. So we replace m with negative 11, so it's negative 2 times negative 11 minus 5 should equal the opposite of m. So the opposite of negative 11 is positive 11 plus 6. So we're going to double check and make sure that works. So negative 2 times negative 11 is positive 22 plus negative 5 should equal 17, and it does. That's a true statement. So we know that we have the correct answer. So now let's do a quick review with the distributive property, because what we're getting ready to do is take the distributive property and put this into equations like the one we just saw. So this equals 3 times x plus 3 times 5, which equals 3x plus 15. This is an example of our distributive property. The first thing we're going to do is change subtraction to addition. So the first thing we're going to do once we've changed subtraction to addition and division and multiplication is simplify each side. And in this case, that means applying the distributive property. So we're going to multiply negative 2.5 times 2y and negative 2.5 times negative. So we end up with negative 2.5 times 2y, which is going to give us negative 5y, and plus negative 2.5 times negative 4, which gives us 10. So at this point, we have our basic equation, but we just have variables on each side. So we're going to start like we always do by adding 6 to both sides. We're adding the constant that's on the left-hand side. We're adding the opposite of it to both sides so that it will go away. When we simplify each side, we end up with negative 3y on the left-hand side because the negative 6 and the 6 cancel each other out to equal 0. And on the right-hand side, we end up with negative 5y plus 16 because we had to add the 6 to the 10. So we're going to add 5y to both sides in order to get rid of all of our variables on the right side. We don't want any variables on the right side. We want all of our variables to be on the left side, and we want all our constants to be on the right side. Once we simplify, 5y plus negative 3y is 2y. 5y plus negative 5y is 0, so those are gone. And so we end up with 16 on the right-hand side. So now we're going to multiply both sides by 1/2 to get y by itself. And the reciprocal property is always, always, always your last step when you solve an equation. So 1/2 times 1, cancel to give us 1. 1 times y is just y. And 1/2 times 16, we cross cancel, and we get 8. So in this example, we always change subtraction to addition as our first step, and then we're going to see if we need to simplify each side, and we do. So on the left-hand side, we're going to use the distributive property because we can't add x and negative 3 together, but we can multiply negative 2. On the right-hand side, we can't add x plus negative 4, but we can distribute the negative. So we do have some simplifying that needs to take place on both sides. On the left-hand side, when we distribute, we're going to get negative 2 times x plus negative 2 times negative 3. On the right-hand side, we have to distribute the negative throughout the parentheses, so we get negative x plus positive 4. Since that's a negative 4, it becomes a positive 4 when we distribute the negative 3. So now I'm going to simplify my left-hand side and get negative 2x plus 6 equals negative x plus 4. Now, you don't have to show this first step. You could go straight into saying negative 2x plus 6 equals negative x plus 4. It doesn't matter. If you need to show that first step, please do, if that helps you cut down careless mistakes and understand what you're doing. Next, we're going to add negative 6 to both sides, just like we always would. Start off to solve our equations. We want to get rid of any constants that are being added to the left-hand side. So we don't want any constants over there. When we simplify, the 6 and the negative 6 equals 0, so we get negative 2x on the left equals negative x plus 4 plus negative 6 is negative 2. So the next thing we do is we want to get rid of that negative x on the right-hand side. We don't want any variables on the right-hand side, so we're going to add the opposite to both sides. We're going to add an x to both sides. That brings our variable over to the left-hand side and gets rid of it from the right-hand side. And we're adding, because we're working with the opposite property, since we had negative x plus negative 2, we're adding in there. So we're working with our opposite property. Once we simplify, we end up with negative x, or negative 1x, however you want to think about it, equals The negative x and the x cancel to equal 0. So negative x equals negative 2. We're going to multiply by negative 1 on both sides, because that's the reciprocal of negative 1, which we have negative x, which means negative 1x. So you're going to multiply by negative 1 on both sides, and that gives us a positive x equaling 2. So when we get down to having to add 1/2 b plus negative 3b, you're actually subtracting 3 minus 1/2, which is going to give us 2.5, and we have more negatives than positives, so it's negative 2.5b equals negative 15. Now, at this point, we need to multiply both sides by the reciprocal. Well, we have to have not a mixed number in order to do that, to know what the numerator and the denominator are. So we have to change negative 2.5 to a improper fraction. So that's negative 5/2 b equals negative 15. So what I want you to keep in mind is that when you're adding fractions, you do want to work with mixed numbers. When you're multiplying fractions, you want to work with improper fractions or fractions, not mixed numbers. So adding fractions, mixed numbers are easier. Multiplying fractions, you can't have mixed numbers. And that's really important to keep in mind as you're doing all these steps. So when we get here, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal, which is negative 2/5 on both sides. We can do some cross-canceling to make this problem a little easier. Remember, it's just two negative fractions, so when you multiply two negative fractions, you get a positive, and 3 times 2 is 6. It's 6/1, which is just 6. As usual, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this with, instead of subtraction, with addition. You could change it in the original problem, but I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it. Now, I can't add my 4 to anything on the left-hand side because I have to deal with the distributive property before I can do that. Same thing for the right-hand side. I can't add that negative 5 until I deal with my distributive property. So basically, my next step is going to be distribution on both sides. So on the left-hand side, I'm going to be multiplying negative 1/2 times everything in parentheses, and on the right-hand